19,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, a propeller cuts a hole in a passenger plane.
As the prop came off, I thought, oh crap, it's going to kill me. It's going to cut me in two.
The pilots fight to control their plane.
Well, we all knew that, boy, this is about as bad as it can get.
They can barely get turned around.
There was no way that we could have landed the airplane.
Dispatch, Mayday. Gotta get some controls back where I absolutely cannot land.
Turn off the autopilot.
You out of your freaking mind?
The pilots manage to get within sight of a runway.
I mean, we're essentially passengers now.
But soon discover that this landing is impossible.
Brace yourself, boy.
Son of a bitch.
I wish I'd have called in sick.
Mayday, Mayday.
Cold Bay, Alaska. A frontier town at the tip of the Alaskan Peninsula, surrounded by the Aleutian Mountains and thousands of kilometers of ocean. Reeve Aleutian Airlines is one of Cold Bay's only links to the outside world. It operates a small fleet of rugged planes carrying people and cargo across the state and beyond. Reeve Aleutian Airlines Flight 8 prepares to leave Cold Bay for Seattle, Washington. The route will take the flight over a wide stretch of the North Pacific Ocean. 54-year-old Captain James Gibson is a hardened bush pilot with more than 25 years' experience flying Alaska's tough terrain.
Set takeoff thrust.
Gibson's flight engineer
Thrust set.
is 45-year-old Alaskan Gerald the Moose Lauren. His first officer is 39-year-old Gary Lintner.
Generally, we flew that route once a week. On this particular day, we were scheduled for 5 hours of flying time.
Gear up. Gear up.
Flaps up good.
Flaps up. Reeve 8 is off the ground, about 2-3. Reeve 8, roger, and have a good flight.
There are 10 passengers on board, mostly hunters and anglers. Wendy Kroon is the senior flight attendant.
We were headed to Seattle. It was a beautiful day. It was clear, no turbulence. Highly unusual. Highly unusual. There should have been turbulence.
Pacific winds and the nearby Aleutian Mountains often create turbulent skies. Captain Gibson will cross the North Pacific aboard a Lockheed L-188 Electra, powered by 4 turboprop engines.
They're just an incredibly tough airplane. Stronger than 10 acres of garlic, I used to always say.
Gibson finishes turning his aircraft on course towards Seattle when he hears an unusual buzzing sound.
You hear that, Gary?
I do. Not sure.
I noticed that the vibration that I was feeling in my feet and the vibration that was in the glass was different. And that's the first time I'd ever come across that. And I thought, well, this is a little different.
Well, let's have a look.
Yeah, you bet.
As Gibson and Lintner wait for Moose Lauren to report back, the vibrations become more pronounced.
I distinctly remember looking down and seeing my control yoke shaking. And I turned to Jim and I said, Jesus, look at this. And Jim and I are kind of looking at each other across the cockpit. And finally he says,
Screw this. Let's turn around.
Meanwhile, Wendy Kroon helps Lauren check the engines.
The engineer said, I want you to come back and check number 4 engine and see if you can see anything. And just as I looked out the window, the engine went. As the prop came off, I thought, oh crap, it's going to kill me. It's going to cut me in two. But it flew forward, and then it came back and slapped the engine, and then underneath.
The prop tears a hole in the bottom of the plane.
There was a big, huge bang.
Holy sauce! What are you okay?
then, of course, the cockpit gets all foggy, and there's almost no sound. Your eardrums are popped.
The hole in the fuselage has caused an explosive decompression.
Cabin pressure dropping.
The rapid change in air temperature and pressure creates heavy fog, which obscures vision and starves the plane of oxygen.
So when you try to breathe it, you end up getting lightheaded and you can actually pass out.
It's a little disconcerting because of the fog and it's quiet. You'd think, geez, am I dead or not? Oh, God. Finally, when the fog cleared, I saw out the window that we were in a right turn.
A right turn is taking the flight northwest towards the Bering Sea.
And so I naturally grabbed the yoke to try to level the wings.
Jet! No ailerons either.
It felt like the yoke was in concrete. It just felt solid as a concrete block.
At the moment that the propeller strikes the fuselage, junior flight attendant Victoria Fredenhagen, in the back of the plane, springs into action.
After the explosions, I wasn't sure what had happened. But I got up and got the oxygen walk-around bottle, put that on. I went to look out the right side, and the passenger there said to me, "You don't want to look out the window." And it was like, oh, there's no propeller on number 4.
Wendy Kroon and Moose Lauren are dazed by the explosion, but they are not injured.
I had fallen all the way back, on my back. So I jumped up, and my first thoughts were get the passengers to the back of the airplane. But I had a really bad feeling. I stopped with one foot still in the air. And I grabbed a hold of the cargo net, and I was hanging on it, and looked down at my foot. And, my heart dropped to my feet. Fear just ran through me. I looked straight down at my foot over a hole, straight down to the ocean. I can actually, to this day, see the ocean, that view. The color, the white caps.
The hole is more than half a meter wide.
That scared the crap out of me.
In the cockpit, the pilots still have no idea what has happened.
Jim and I got our masks on, and within seconds, Moose came through the cockpit door and said, "Holy crap, we just lost number 4 propeller." Jim, he said, "What do you mean lost it?" Moose said, "It's gone. It went away." So he reached up and pulled the emergency shutdown handle on the number 4 engine.
But James Gibson has a more immediate problem. The loss of cabin pressure, with a jammed control column. He can't descend to a lower altitude where there's more oxygen.
Everybody, calm down. Just a second.
Jim saw that the autopilot disconnect lights were on, and he reached over and turned the autopilot back on again.
The Electra has 2 sets of control cables. The manual cables are jammed, but the cables for the autopilot seem to be working.
Wings level.
And I personally thought that was probably one of the smartest things that anybody ever did in the history of aviation.
Sending to 10,000.
The autopilot is now keeping the plane on a steady and descending course over the North Pacific. For the moment, everything seems to be under control. Until...
There's a hole back there. I can see straight through. Yeah, right straight through the plane. I saw the ocean.
And then they go, "Wait, a hole through the floor?" I go, "Yes, a hole through the floor." I wanted to yell at them. They were like, "Yes, I saw a freaking hole in the floor."
Whatever she can put oxygen on.
Gibson is flying fast, over 200 knots. He's down one engine and his control column is jammed. He must find a way to slow down, or his plane will rip apart.
Full power back to 2,000.
Nothing. When his hand moved those throttles back and the horsepower gauges didn't move, I'll tell you what, I said, man, I wish I'd have called in sick. You know, that's when I knew, and well, we all knew that, boy, this is really a bad situation. This is about as bad as it can get.
The throttle cables must be cut. Son of a bitch!
The pilots can't slow the engines. The speed could tear apart the damaged plane. It's also preventing Gibson from descending as quickly as he'd like.
Come on, come on. Still at 65. Let's see if we can get turned around.
Gibson instructs the autopilot to make a right turn back to Cold Bay, but there's something wrong. It seems the autopilot's lateral control is also damaged.
And if we just cracked it to the right, just the slightest bit, the airplane would start immediately rolling into a rapid right-hand turn. And it scared the living crap out of all of us. And the only way to get it out of that rapid right-hand turn was to turn that control knob all the way full left. And then it would just barely stop the right turn and just slowly bring the airplane back.
Gibson has no way of steering his airplane. He can't descend quickly, and his emergency oxygen is running out. The crew and passengers are flying straight out to sea, with no way to return to safety in a plane on the verge of tearing itself apart. Through terrifying trial and error, Captain James Gibson discovers what his damaged plane can and cannot do.
Okay, stable?
His autopilot has put the plane into a slow descent, but turning is next to impossible. Reeve 8 is stuck at full throttle, flying further and further from land.
Clear an emergency. Mayday, Mayday. This is Reeve 8. Number 4.
Flight dispatcher Richard Huff receives the call at the Reeve base in Anchorage.
Reeve 8 had taken off out of Coal Bay prior to my coming to work, and probably 45 minutes after I had gone on shift, they called me.
Reeve 8, manual flight control C's. Heading 104. Full throttle, unable to reduce speed.
Is that you, Gary? It's Huff.
Yeah, we've done nothing.
Reeve 8, understand. No flight control. Confirmed.
No, negative. We got no manual control, but autopilot, vertical control kind of working. Approaching 10,000 feet.
Dropping at 10,000 feet. Okay, I got you. It was the worst damage report I had ever had at our company.
The autopilot finally gets the Electra down to 10,000 feet. Captain Gibson activates the autopilot's altitude hold switch. It works. The plane holds at 10,000 feet.
Reeve 8, running at 10,000 feet. Over.
Thank God. It's now safe to remove your masks.
That's a whole lot better.
Passengers are no longer at risk of hypoxia, but Gibson still can't slow down or turn back to safety.
Reeve 8, you guys going back to Coal Bay?
We're working on it. Trying to figure out how to fly this thing.
Everybody wants to know what's going on, so I'm really busy talking on the radio. And I'm watching Jim try to overpower the autopilot or help the autopilot.
The autopilot won't turn the plane around. Gibson still can't budge his column to make a manual turn.
And I thought, well, hell, maybe I can do that. So I reached up and I grabbed the yoke and I moved it. Whoa! And it scared the living hell out of Jim.
Gary, hold on!
He just about climbed out of his seat, you know. And I felt terrible, but now at least we knew that we could overpower or help the autopilot. So that meant that probably our control cables were not severed. And that was really good news.
The pilots use their combined force to muscle the plane into a slow right bank. They begin a long turn back to Cold Bay. The wide turns will get the plane on course, but won't provide the precision needed to land.
The aircraft, being a 1950s vintage aircraft, was not equipped with Autoland type autopilots. It didn't have the sophistication that would allow it to line up directly on an airport in Autoland.
We can't land like this. No chance in hell.
Without manual control, there's no way to land the airplane.
Even if Gibson beats the odds and manages to line up with the runway at Cold Bay, he's traveling too fast to land.
Good chance it would have gone off the end of the runway if we'd have landed at the 200 and some knots.
Gibson won't be able to slow down. He needs a longer runway.
Dispatch, Reeve 8. How long is that runway in King Salmon? About 9,000 feet?
King Salmon Airport is more than 500 kilometers northeast of Cold Bay. It's further away, but has a longer runway.
Reeve 8, King Salmon runway is 8,900 feet long. Over. Moose, if we land at 200 knots, is 8,900 feet going to do it?
No, not even close.
Gibson considers a measure of last resort. Ditch the plane in the Pacific.
Dispatch, Reeve 8. I may have to ditch in the water at Bristol Bay.
350 kilometers from Cold Bay, Bristol Bay is close to emergency rescue support, but Richard Huff is against Gibson's plan.
This is the ocean, and unlike a river, it's got swells, and no, I was totally against an ocean ditching.
Like the 1996 ditching of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, Gibson risks cartwheeling and killing everyone on board if he doesn't land perfectly.
Reeve 8 strongly advised do not land in Bristol Bay.
Oh, no kidding.
In Anchorage, Richard Huff proposes another risky plan. Fly northeast towards home base at Anchorage Airport.
Anchorage International had 2 runways that were 10,500, plus all the medical facilities that were in the area made it a more viable operation.
Reeve 8 dispatch. Consider flight direct at Anchorage. Over.
Flying to Anchorage is risky. The towering mountains rise to nearly 10,000 feet. The 700-kilometer passage would take the crippled Electra through unpredictable weather over the Aleutian Mountains. If Gibson encounters turbulence en route to Anchorage, it could cause more damage to his already vulnerable plane.
Reeve 8 strongly suggest Anchorage. Over.
Dispatch, Reeve 8. I heard you the first time, and this will be my decision. Over. Moose, got enough fuel to get to Anchorage?
Yeah, we're good. More than enough.
Dispatch, Reeve 8. Confirm weather conditions in Anchorage.
Light surface winds 260 degrees at 9 knots at Anchorage.
This thing's a damn tank. We'll make it.
Okay, dispatch. We are flying to Anchorage.
Roger, Reeve 8. Inbound to Anchorage. Standing by.
By experimenting, Gibson has slowly mastered the damaged autopilot. He delicately adjusts the lateral control and then adds muscle to the column, forcing the plane on a new heading to Anchorage.
Okay, stable. Don't touch a thing.
For now, Gibson has luck on his side. There is no turbulence as they pass over the Aleutian Mountains, but his engines are still stuck on full throttle. In Anchorage, ground crews prepare for disaster. After 4 anxious hours, Reeve Flight 8 approaches Anchorage Airport from the west. Captain Gibson carefully adjusts the autopilot and begins circling the airport. His only hope is that he can somehow regain enough control to attempt a landing before running out of fuel.
The controls were just real stiff, and all we knew was that as long as we tried to use the autopilot and manually helped, that we could fly the airplane a little bit. Made some turns and a little bit of pitch control.
At Reeve headquarters, flight engineer John Minton is called in to help the pilots find a way to land their plane.
I was walked through the scenario by the people that were already there and asked to help any way I could with my knowledge of the aircraft.
Dispatch, Reeve 8.
Hang on.
I gotta get some controls back where I absolutely cannot land. Over.
Roger, Reeve 8. We're working on that.
The Electra has 2 separate flight control systems that work side by side but are completely separate from each other. They have the autopilot and then they have manual. So if one is damaged, the other is there. In this scenario, the mechanical side was damaged and the autopilot side was not damaged.
Minton considers the options. His conclusion shocks everyone.
Disconnect the autopilot, see what happens.
All of us wanted to see if manual control of the airplane was an option. And the only way to do that is take the autopilot out of the system and see if the normal manual hydraulic system was workable in any way, shape, or form.
Reeve 8, John Minton suggests turn off the autopilot.
Are you out of your frickin' mind?
If any of the manual flight cables were severed during the accident, and Gibson disconnects the autopilot, they may be left with no control at all.
Yeah, we thought the airplane could possibly just go out of control. And then if we couldn't re-engage the autopilot, then we'd really be in for a thoroughly entertaining afternoon.
In what could be his last flight command, Gibson hits the autopilot disconnect.
Disconnecting. Autopilot.
For him to put his thumb on that button and disconnect that autopilot was just about the bravest thing I think he thought he ever did in his life.
The plane remains steady. With the autopilot disconnected, Gibson checks to see if his manual controls have loosened.
Nothing.
They're still jammed.
Jim immediately turned the autopilot back on again. And by this time, we were pretty depressed. This was not looking good at all. There was no way that we could have landed the airplane just using the autopilot. There just was not enough control.
The lives of the 15 people on board depend on the pilots getting more control of the plane. But having spent hours struggling with jammed manual controls and a crippled autopilot, Captain Gibson needs a rest.
Gary, I'm done. You gotta take it.
He was just done in. And he said, Gary, you take the airplane, I'm going to take the break.
The crew is exhausted and out of options. Then, Lintner notices something that changes the entire situation.
I looked down at the autopilot, and I suddenly saw that the autopilot was off. It's turned off. And I'm sitting here making turns with the airplane. Hell, I've got a good 3-degree bank going, you know.
Lintner is steering the plane without any help from the autopilot.
And I turned to Jim and I said, hey, I've got control here. What? You know, and man, immediately he grabbed the yoke and the two of us got on it. And with the two of us, hell, we had pretty good control. And that's when he said, oh man, this is a whole different ballgame now.
Somehow the pilots have gained enough manual control to pitch the nose up and steer a course for the runway.
As long as we have manual control over the airplane without the autopilot, it would have been okay. You give us 3 degrees of bank and 1 degree of pitch, and we'll deal with the rest.
Huh? I don't know how, but we got some control back. Coming in.
But Gibson still faces one major problem.
It's a 10,000-foot runway, but you can still run out of runway if you're going too fast.
He's traveling far too quickly to land. Captain Jim Gibson is about to try landing his badly damaged Lockheed Electra. The plane's 4 engines are numbered left to right. The first 3 are stuck on full throttle. Gibson needs to shut one of them down to slow his plane.
Huh? We'll kill number 1 to offset the loss on number 4.
No. They shut down number 1. They shut down everything.
Negative, Reeve. Engine number 1 now controls power generator for all hydraulics. Do not shut down number 1.
The loss of number 1 engine and the probable loss of the hydraulic system would have caused the crash of the airplane.
Okay, Moose. Kill number 2. Get ready to shut down engine number 2.
Their speed drops, but not enough.
185 knots. It's too fast.
There was no fooling around. Lives were at stake on the ground and in the air.
Gibson speeds towards the runway, still unsure how to stop his plane once he gets there. At 8:13 p.m., he risks it all and attempts a landing.
Let's do this.
Anchorage, Reeve 8, ready to land, runway 6 right.
Reeve 8, clear to land, runway 6 right.
You might want to go in the back for this.
Wendy Kroom returns to the passenger cabin to make final preparations for landing.
I really had that strong toe to, do my duty and get to the back.
To do so, she must cross the gaping hole in the cabin floor.
I jumped across up onto the seats with my arms trying to hold on to the overhead bins, trying to hold up as much weight as I could. And I went about 4 rolls before I went down onto the floor and then crossed and got to the back.
With barely any control and too much speed, Gibson begins the approach.
Shoes off. Place all sharp objects in the air sickness bags.
This too?
Yeah.
Approach flaps. Approach flaps. Gear down. Gear down.
The pilots pull back on their columns to raise the nose for landing. Seconds before touchdown, they cross the foot of the runway.
170 knots.
50 knots faster than normal.
Sink rate 800 feet a minute.
I'd never had to myself or watched anybody else try to land an airplane that fast.
They can do this. They can do this.
News crews capture the attempt. But at the last minute, Gibson realizes he's still going too fast and can't land safely.
Son of a bitch.
Go around. Go around. We're good. We're good.
When we made that first pass, it was too fast, and they were not going to land. And so it was exciting when the gear went down and it came back up. That was good.
The airplane was very low above the trees as we were going up and around, and you could see houses and people down in their yards.
The failed approach proves Gibson may be attempting the impossible.
Our problem was that we were just going too fast. We were doing 170 knots all the way down.
Gibson must find a way to reduce his speed by at least 10 knots. But shutting down the remaining engines is not an option. The Electra's short wings get most of their lift from air pushed back by the propellers.
You can't just turn the airplane engines off and glide. There was just too much drag from those large propellers, and so the lift of the wing would be gone completely. So the airplane would just fall out of the air.
With 2 engines at full throttle and too much speed to land, Gibson loops out to sea and begins a second approach.
Mayday Tower. Clear for second approach, runway 6 right.
Gear down. Gear down.
Planes pick up speed as they descend. To reduce his landing speed, Gibson decides to start his second approach from a mere 800 feet. He also makes a bold decision that will make a second go-around impossible. On touchdown, he's going to kill the 2 remaining engines.
Last chance, guys.
Come on, come on, come on, come on. Nuts.
The plane hits the ground.
Cut all engines! We're shut down engines 1 and 3!
Once the E-handles were pulled, the airplane was committed. There was no turning back.
With all the engines cut, the plane slows down. But there's a high price to pay. It's the engines that provide the electrical and hydraulic power that controls the steering and brakes.
Now we're hurtling projectile down the runway with no hydraulic control of the airplane.
Well, now, isn't this something? We got no control, directional control at all on this airplane. I mean, we're essentially passengers now. We've become passengers with front row seats.
Reeve Aleutian Flight 8 speeds at 140 knots down the runway. But Captain Gibson has no hydraulic brakes. All he has are emergency brakes, and they don't have nearly as much stopping power. Overwhelmed by the speed of the plane, the emergency brakes burst into flames.
Now we're going off the runway. We're definitely going off the runway. We're just looking straight into that ditch. And Jim says, brace yourselves, boys.
Brace yourselves! Nice!
I think we're there.
There was no real emergency because we could sense that everything was good.
Everybody's fine back here. Well, there's of course adrenaline running at that point. It felt good. I think it was just surreal because we were okay.
We're all good! Heck of a landing, guys. Heck of a landing.
And as soon as I hit the ground, one of the passengers come up to me and goes, "When's the next flight to Seattle?" I'm looking at him like, I don't think you realize how bad the situation was.
I'm still amazed. that they got it on the ground without hurting anybody or anything. They didn't even put a scratch on the airplane.
We just sat there and watched them foam the airplane.
There was foam all over the airplane from the fire trucks and firemen, and the airplane was reasonably okay.
Passengers exit the plane. But Gibson has one last command before he releases his crew.
That's coach ties, boys.
Jim said, well, boys, I think we handled that like real true professionals. I think we ought to get our hats, coats, and ties on for our departure.
After a 6-hour ordeal, Captain Gibson and his crew have landed a badly crippled plane and saved the lives of everyone on board. It's now up to NTSB investigator Ron Schleed to find out what went wrong.
The loss of a propeller in flight is a very serious event. It can lead to catastrophic accident. It has led to catastrophic accidents in the past.
Though the Reeve accident was not catastrophic, it is part of a disturbing trend. Since 1965, there have been 4 cases of spontaneous propeller loss on the Electra L-188.
We had an airplane that nearly went into the ocean because the propeller came off. So we needed to find out as best as we could what caused this accident.
In Washington, investigator Dennis Grossi reviews the cockpit voice recording to understand the challenges faced by the crew as they try to land.
Shortly after takeoff, the flight crew detected a vibration. That vibration continued on and until the propeller departed the aircraft, damaging the fuselage, causing a rapid decompression of the cabin, a loss of engine controls, and the limited flight control authority.
For Schleed, there are only 2 possible causes that can explain the loss of the propeller.
A fatigue crack or some other pre-existing damage would cause the whole propeller assembly to separate, and that has happened before. The other possibility is the gearbox, the power gears that drive the propeller. If there's a catastrophic failure there, that can also cause the engine or the propeller assembly and gearbox to separate. That has also happened in the past.
His team studies what's left of the damaged engine. Right away, it's clear his investigation will be difficult.
The wreckage really didn't give us much of a clue because what we needed to look at was gone.
The propeller and the gearbox it was attached to are lost at sea. The parts that likely caused the vibration are gone for good. Without them, the case may be impossible to solve. With no physical evidence to examine, Schleed's team studies the plane's flight data recorder, hoping it can explain the vibration.
The flight recorder on this airplane was a very rudimentary recorder. It records by a stylus scraping a metal foil. And so it's not a very scientific thing compared to what we have today. So we could not, on the flight recorder, determine where the vibration came from.
The Electra has a history of engine vibration. Vibration so serious, it's been known to tear the plane apart at high speed. Investigators examined the rubber mounts designed to absorb those vibrations. If they're worn down, it could explain the accident. But the mounts check out. The investigation hits another dead end.
We could not determine even a probable cause in this case. When you can't do that and have to say, I don't know, that's very hard for an investigator to say.
But there is one other question Schleed hopes he can answer. Why was Gibson's plane so hard to land? In 4 other cases, when an Electra's propeller separated, the planes landed without incident.
The loss of a propeller is not necessarily catastrophic. It's designed to fly with only half its engines.
Yet with 3 engines intact, Gibson could barely maintain control of his plane. Something made this case unique. NTSB investigators examined the gash where the propeller punctured the hull.
Doesn't look like any cables are cut.
The hole explains the decompression, but not the complete lack of control. It's only by taking a closer look from inside the cabin that they finally discover the root of the control problem: the badly damaged cabin floor.
That buckling of the floor from the explosive decompression jammed the flight controls, where the cables ran through holes in the floor structure.
The autopilot control cables and the manual cables were both pinched by the collapsed floor.
Jen!
But because only the autopilot uses hydraulics to move the cables, it can apply far more force on them than a human pilot. This is why the autopilot was able to control the plane ever so slightly.
They were able to get the autopilot to move the control surfaces to make minimal corrections and keep the airplane stable.
Hey, I've got some control here. What?
But with the manual cables so badly jammed, investigators wonder why the crew was suddenly able to regain enough control to land the plane. A closer look at the pinched cables explains why they eventually came free.
Looks like they saw their way out of this mess.
They kept pulling as hard as they could on the old pushing and pulling, turning.
Deep scars in the hull's joists tell the tale. The pinched control cables gradually carved channels into the airframe.
They were actually cutting right into the metal during the long flight before they landed.
That gave the crew just enough control to get the plane lined up with the runway.
Let's do this. Anchorage, Reeve 8, ready to land, runway 6 right.
Dennis Grossi believes brute force was only part of what made this flight exceptional.
I've listened to a lot of CBRs in my 35 years with the NTSB, and there's nothing that even comes close to this one. And the crew was quite exceptional.
Anchorage, Reeve 8, ready to land, runway 6 right. Reeve 8, command to main, runway 6 right. Gear down. Gear down. 170 knots, sink rate 800 feet a minute.
They were able to regain control of the aircraft and start a descent, which is extraordinary.
Once in Anchorage, Gibson resisted the temptation to land on his first approach.
Son of a bitch.
Quite often when pilots are on approach and things start to go wrong, the instinct is to get the airplane down and land it in spite of the conditions.
Go around, go around.
The captain showed extraordinary airmanship and leadership.
Gibson's last flight command may have distinguished him most.
Cut all engines! Emergency shutdown engines 1 and 3!
Then, of course, the decision by the captain to cut the power once they touched down, that eliminated the possibility of a go-around. So he knew at that point that this is it.
In 1983, U.S. President Ronald Reagan recognized Captain James Gibson and his crew for their heroic landing.
I said, you too, what does it feel like when the propeller starts to cut through the side of the plane? Well, it was a few moments there that I wouldn't want to repeat, sir. It was exciting.
James Gibson flew with Reeve for 6 more years before retiring. He died in 2010. Gary Lintner retired from Reeve and professional flying in 1996. Victoria Fredenhagen left aviation and opened her own business in Anchorage. 2 years after their fateful flight, Moose Lauren and Wendy Kroon married. Reeve Aleutian Airlines folded in 2000 after 68 years of service.